Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Dunja Rmandić. I'm the curator here at Mornington Peninsula Regional Gallery, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge that we meet today on Bunurong land. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present, and those who are learning. And also I'd like to acknowledge that they have looked after this land for thousands of generations, and it's a privilege to live and work on this land. I'd also like to acknowledge all the lands from which you join us, the traditional owners of the lands from which you join us, and Lisa as well from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Some of you may have been at the opening last night, and I think a lot of you would also know both Lisa and Brendan, but I will do a little introduction for those of you who don't. Lisa Walker, to our middle there. Lisa Walker's vast body of work is a career-length conversation with the question of what is jewellery. Lisa has travelled and worked in Australia, Europe, UK and Asia. She studied in Munich, living and working in the city from 2002 until 2009, with her peers that included Helen Britton, David Bierländer, Carl Fritsch, and Chicks on Speed duo Melissa Logan and Alex Murray Leslie. Walker's work was the subject of a major retrospective at the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongareva, in 2018, at Melbourne's RMIT Design Hub in 2019, and at the Museum Villa Struck in Munich in 2020. Her work is in the collection of major museums around the world, including the National Gallery of Victoria, Art Gallery of Western Australia, Auckland Museum, Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich, and the Dow's Museum in Wellington. In 2010, she won two eminent international prizes for jewellery, the Herbert Hoffman Prize and the Francois van der Bosch Prize. Walker lives and works in Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. As well as being the front man for the Melbourne punk rock band Eddy Current Suppression Ring, by the way, one of my favourite band names of all time, Brendan? Yeah. Brendan Huntley has been exhibiting his art since 2005. He has had several key solo exhibitions with Utopian Slums and Talano Galleries, as well as showing work in key group exhibitions including New Psychedelia in University of Queensland Art Museum in 2011, Primavera at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Sydney in 2013, Melbourne Now at the National Gallery of Victoria, also 2013, and Dark Heart, Adelaide Biennial of Australian Art, 2014. His works are held in many national and international public collections, including at the National Gallery of Victoria, Art Gallery of South Australia, Art Bank, Shepparton Art Museum and the British Museum, as well as many private collections in Australia and internationally. And we have borrowed from many of those private collections for both of your works. So thank you very much for making this possible. So both of you have had such great and exciting careers. But I'd like to take it back a little bit. And I was wondering if I could start with you, Lisa, and just hear from you about how your creative journey started.
A creative journey. Yeah, so I was born. I mean, it's an interesting question because, yeah. So, you know, all kids, and especially when you've had children, you realise how bloody awesome they are with everything they do, you know, creatively, I suppose is one word, but everything they paint, everything how they live is just one amazing art project in a way, in a kind of weird way. Anyway, so yeah, basically when I got to my teens, I kept going. Maybe that's a difference. Like perhaps a lot of kids would stop, perhaps. And then when I left school, I went on the dole and travelled a bit around the country, and kind of didn't think much. So I wasn't making or anything. maybe a little bit of stitching and embroidery. And then in my late teens, I thought I had a conversation with a friend who had just started the craft and design course at art school, the Dunedin Art School. And I thought, oh, that sounds like me. And I got together a portfolio and with a lot of textile work in it, actually, that I'd just been fiddling around with. And I got in. So that's where it all kind of started, I suppose, consciously, you could say. So I started hanging out with more like-minded people. I'd moved to Dunedin. I was going, hang out with lots of musicians and writers and artists from the art school, lots of students, and it sort of, it grew from there, I suppose. That would be like a beginning, you could say. And there was a moment, I think, in a writing course that I did at night where I kind of thought, oh, this could be maybe something, forever in some way. I had no idea what that meant, but it was sort of a recognition of some kind. Yeah, so that's sort of I was about 20 by about that point. Yeah.
And did you continue? What was your study in that first creative course that you did? Was that when did you realise that jewellery might be a kind of way for you to express that creativity? Did you study it formally, or did you kind of stumble upon it in a way?
The first year of the craft and design, we did lots of snippets of everything. So lots of drawing, carving, jewellery, ceramics, and all of this sort of craft within the context of the art school as well. So, we were given briefs, we taught some techniques, given a brief, and then that was sort of the project for the next 6 weeks. That was basically the first year. And then I realised really early that I had an affinity with the tools of jewellery making and the metal. That was really, really clear. And then I would kind of make a joke that when I was a kid, I wanted to be a dentist because I liked the idea of the small room and the tools. And maybe that's connected. I don't know. And that was it then, really. So that's then I was just completely obsessed, and that sort of hasn't stopped. Yeah, totally obsessed with that process and that way of being and living. Yeah.
And what was your early work like? Can you talk us through a little bit of the materials that you were working with and the concepts that you were interested in and exploring at that time?
Apart from student times, shortly after that, I founded Workshop 6 in Auckland. And those pieces, I've been working with Matthew von Sturmer in his studio, and he made these sort of organic kind of pieces in metal. What would they be connected to? I just sort of completely related to them, and I sort of made little mini versions. But in my own way of how I'd basically been taught in Dunedin, which was very, very process-based. You don't do a solder join if you can just join the metal, if it's strong enough just to hold, then why do the solder join? Lots of forging. If we needed silver, we'd melt down granules and put it through the roller, forge it, put it through the roller again, anneal it, the kind of pure goldsmithing in a way. So, that I was just obsessed with goldsmithing, I think, and the tools and the materials. But the pieces that were coming out were kind of organic-y, even though I hate that word, but it's sort of all right. Sort of sea-like, earth-like, not symmetrical. I don't know. There's that was just sort of popping out, I think. Yeah.
What was your creative journey like, Brendan? What got you into all of this?
I suppose it started when I was a little one. My mum and dad were both potters, and my dad's a painter. And so growing up, I'd go to all the markets with them. They were doing sort of functional wear pottery, and then every sort of around October before Christmas, they'd do a exhibition in our house, and it would sort of take over pretty much every room, and we'd lay linen out over every table, and then we'd have everybody come, all their collectors, and I would always be given a little table or a shelf to have my own exhibition, and so I kind of started understanding, just the joy of sharing my art with people and hearing their response. And then so over the years, I always kind of imagined, I'm going to be an artist, this is what I'll do. But then you go to school and all of that's kind of, I don't know, got a bit wishy-washy and teenage life, and I kind of ended up getting into graffiti and like heavily into graffiti. It became my life, and at that same time I was always still drawing and whatnot, but there was something about that action that suited my sort of state of mind at the time. But over the years of doing that, and there was like a lot of paranoia around that activity, I actually saw a therapist, and I didn't realize he was a therapist. I thought he was a homeopath, but it was a lovely sort of introduction to therapy, sneaky. Yeah, I sat down on this chair and I started speaking my mind and came out feeling great, and realized that I really needed to move away from doing graffiti, and it was like a process slowly. At the same time, I was always making and studying. I went to a pre-uni course for arts, and that's where I learned the foundations of colour and form, like everything. It was, to me, that was the space where, I've taken all of that, and it's still within everything I do. And then from there, I went to VCA and Victorian College of the Arts and did a year there, whilst I was still doing a lot of my graffiti, and was using it more as a place to sleep, like in the mornings, like after, and so it didn't really, basically, or exploring and just getting to know the city. I was from Frankston, so moving up and it was just felt like the world was opening up, and that's just where I was at the time. And the lecturers was kind of said, like, we think maybe this isn't right for you, and they gave me another 6 months, and that's when I really picked up and used the tools and used the foundry and used everything they had. And then at the second week of second year, I knew I had to leave. It didn't feel right for me. And at that same time, I got a job working at a record pressing plant. And from there, I was introduced to music. And then, that took me on another journey. And while I was doing all that, I still, every sort of Tuesday night, Mum had her pottery classes. So I'd be down at her classes and I'd just be making my sculptures. And at that time, I thought, I'm going to make art for me, and no one's going to see it. And I don't know, that was just how I did it. But then after a while, I love to share what I do, and I like to hear what people think, and I found a space to show it. And yeah, I guess, that's a kind of roundabout way of where things started.
And while you had great access to ceramics and making and working with ceramics, what was it about ceramics in particular that drew you to it with that material that was kind of speaking to you about what you wanted to say, and starting with that medium in particular?
That's a good question. I guess there's something so immediate about taking the clay and forming it, and I think my whole life that's obviously been a part of it. You just bang, there it is, and the next part is firing it, but that's another exciting stage, opening the door to the kiln, seeing what you've got, and it's always different to what you're kind of imagining, no matter how good you get at it. It's always a surprise. And so I love that, and I love that with graffiti. When you paint a train or something, it's the next day, it's different, and it's like, well, how did that turn out? What can I do differently next time? And so there's a very similar kind of speed to clay making, and and that, like you were saying, like there's an earthiness to the material that I don't know. There's something there that goes deeper than explanation, I suppose.
And it's a very process-oriented too, but different things happen within the different parts of the process, right? Which, you know, for me, what's really interesting is seeing this work where obviously that kind of process is the form, but then there's also the colour and the glaze, and then how that turns out, and then what you do with it, whether it fails or succeeds. Do you... is your process that if something doesn't turn out the way that you intended, do you start remaking it again, or do you accept it, or do you try to fix it? What's that kind of frame of mind that you're going through in that process?
Yeah, there's an element of exception. Like I accept it and learn from it, and give it time, sort of, rather than, you know, putting it out with, like, I mean, that's the other thing with Mum and Dad, you know, functional, where if it's warped or there's a crack or something, it's in the trash or in the garden kind of thing. Whereas for me with sculpture, that's kind of maybe why I steered more towards that. There's you know, it's really up to me, nobody else. And so I really loved that idea of just learning from it, and then, okay, that one is this, what I had in mind, I'm going to try that again. And again, you know, it's always like this kind of constant building upon what you've done, letting go, moving on. Yeah.
And so what were you interested in exploring conceptually through your work? What's kind of been when you started making in those 6 months that really made sense to you, that, you know, you didn't just want to build those skills, but really what was the thing that made you want to go back and continue doing and making the art? What were some of the things that you decided to explore? Because there's quite a variety, and obviously there's a kind of starting point that you've built on over the years. But what was of particular interest to you conceptually?
Well, I tried not to really think too much about that. But looking back, you know, where I've been and what I do, and, you know, and it's funny, it's only when you're talking about it, maybe forced to talk about it, that you start to learn more about why you do things. No. And I mean, you know, I'm interested in humans, myself as a human, and how to survive in this world, and how to move amongst other people, and how we all do that, and, you know, body language, even just maybe walking through a train station or something in the morning on the way to school. You know, you've got these characters over there. Maybe if you kind of hunch a little bit and keep your head down and move past, they won't bother you, you know? I mean, after I've got a little hunch, and I'm like, I wonder if that's from back then, you know, just kind of like, no, I'm cool, you know? And, you know, and then after a while you start to know those characters through things, and it's another thing of feeling confident. Hey guys, you know, it's me again. And I think that's kind of coming through, you know, just, well, yeah, that's something. So, yeah.
That certainly is something, yeah. So my first experience of Brendan's work was his first show, Utopian Slums, and that particular show, we've got a few works from that show, first and the second show, kind of at the beginning of the exhibition. And the first thing that was really noticeable was the face that was a balaclava face. And for me, that kind of reference to the balaclava was both ominous and, you know, kind of with those criminal elements attached to it, but also it was about the protection of the wearer, and kind of thinking about that confidence, thinking about a camouflage and thinking about a mask. And I think it was sort of early on in our conversation, you know, I had a little woolen balaclava for me that my grandma knitted for me, because I grew up where there's snow and she wanted to keep me warm, and so I would go out skiing and this balaclava, I would put it on. And so that was my first association of a balaclava. And so I kind of loved this interplay of the face that was both hidden, protected, but also had kind of a lot to say, existed in a couple of different spaces at the same time. So I think this idea of faces in this show was really important. That was kind of what, where I was starting from as well. So it's kind of interesting that, your movement through those spaces is kind of also about confidence or familiarity as well. Lisa, what about you? You moved to Munich at some point and decided to take a very kind of conceptual approach to your practice. Can you talk us through about some of those conceptual ideas that you were interested in? Why did you even decide to go to Munich? What was your kind of idea around where you wanted to take your practice?
Yeah, I think me and Brendan have some similarities there in that I struggle with this word conceptual, to be honest, because I think, it's more like kind of life stuff and experiences and culture and conversations and what you've read and your life and everyone else's life kind of seeping into the work. So is that I suppose that's conceptual. But I've always struggled a little with the connotations that's kind of attached to that word, really, because it kind of implies sort of this plan and this very clear idea of what a piece is going to look like or where it's come from. And for me, actually, the most exciting thing is not fucking knowing, in a way, like not really understanding even. I mean, there's a part of me that sort of wants to understand, and sometimes, of course, you have to a point, understand. If you're asked to write something, or even now, talking about it, or I do actually also write as well, little snippets of writing that come into my book sometimes. So that's kind of it's not really understanding though, it's sort of part of the process of making, really. And then with Munich, yes, I've always had this adventure thing, and I left home really early, and I kind of see it in my kids now. They just want to go, they want to leave the nest. And I guess I must have had that too, of course, so I did. And when I was, 26, Carl Fritsch and Alex Murray-Leslie came to New Zealand and gave a lecture about the Arts Academy in Munich. And just at that point, I come back from travelling. I'd set up a workshop in Auckland with some friends, and I was thinking, okay, I want to go away again. And that school's awesome because it's free. This amazing professor, Otto Künzli, was there, who kind of freaked me out because he was a real conceptual jeweller and had these very amazing stories attached to his pieces, and that kind of freaked me out, actually. But because I knew, I didn't quite know, couldn't say what I'm saying now about all that, but I had just a real gut feeling that wasn't my way, I suppose. And and then so I applied and I got in, and long story short, ended up with Carl. Dropped the boyfriend, the other boy. Yeah, poor Rob. Anyway, and I thought I'd stay 1 year, and ended up staying 6 and studying. Sally came, a few people came from around the place and went into the class as well. So half of us were foreigners, half German, and had a baby. Yeah, had another one. So 15 years later, I ended up moving back to Wellington. Yeah, that's that.
So in terms of the materials that you're using and the kind of the approach that you have to your work, it's very particular. Can you talk us through a little bit of how you work? How do you approach what's your process? Do you have a lot of materials in your studio? Do you have a particular routine? Do you how do these pieces come about?
That's such a big question, and so maybe I just pick the closest piece, which is the nails there, just as an example maybe. So the stuffed fabric I've been doing also since I was a kid, and when I started moving a lot, not away from, but kind of along with goldsmithing and starting to add other materials to stuff fabric and make sort of three-dimensional forms was so normal. I didn't even know I was doing it almost. So that's kind of piece number 500 or something from that. Textile is something also that comes incredibly naturally to me. In fact, that's all I do now. So for about the last 3 years, it's pretty much only painted textile. And then with the nails, Bernhard Schaubinger, he's a Swiss jeweller. He was starting to put nails into his pieces, just not long after Carl did. And I love it in the field when there's, accusations and people pinching off each other and stealing and borrowing and, all those wonderful things about influence. That not just jewellery art, we're all kind of all obsessed with this. I did it first. No, I did. No, and all that awesome. I love influence. In fact, for a long time I would consciously kind of steal, actually, just to figure out where I fit with that idea of influence. So thinking of that. That's also how that piece, I thought I've got it my turn to do nails now, So there's the necklace.
And do you work a lot with found materials? There's quite a few pieces there. There's the mobile phones and one of the early Mac laptops and a lot of plastic and a lot of wood. There's a beautiful cobblestone necklace over there from Munich, which is one of my favourites. Can you talk us through a little bit, how do you source your materials? There's the Punamul jade and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so apart from the last while when it's pretty much I've been making my own forms. So the found objects are really easing off for now. Let's see what the future holds. So I'm always looking and finding and buying and looking online, anything that kind of catches my eye, that makes some kind of sense to something I'm working on or might work on or have worked on, something that sort of connects with me. The skateboard pendant there, for example, is literally my boy Max, obsessive skateboarder. And, every few weeks he'd bring home a skateboard that he's broken, from whatever it is he's done. Yeah, and I quickly, just putting the holes where the original screws go back in without the middle section, and there's that beautiful shape and colour and all the scrape marks. And, so that made sense to me for my work, but also as a parent. Really, I love being a parent. And there was a thing when the kids were born, and that piece has got a lot of this in there. As a mother and a woman, I kind of felt like I dropped quite a few notches having a child, because suddenly all that, energy that's to go into my work is going into a kid now. So that means I'm not a good artist anymore or something. I don't know. I had to figure it all out for myself. And now, of course, it's unbelievably and not just enriching, but it's just more information for work, really. I mean, I steal off my kids quite a bit. Yeah.
Brendan, what's your process? What's your process been with quite a few of these works? There's a kind of they're very different, but they kind of seem to have a certain core. But I'm just wondering about your process in particular.
I mean, I guess I could start by saying I have 2 studios, one for painting, drawing, and one for sculpture. And the sculpture studio is where I grew up. And I've just kind of built upon that studio. And maybe that process is wherever I am going that day, I just apply whatever I'm feeling. And so if I'm in the sculpture studio, I guess I'm just getting things out. I'm not really going in with too many ideas. It's more like I have like a lot of old molds like that are from where my dad had made when we grew up, like just for simple shapes. It might be like a bell shape or a perfume bottle that they would have used for something, and so I would start sticking clay in there, and that's a great little hairdo instead of a perfume bottle, and then bowls of eyes, whatever, and things kind of build upon themselves, and I kind of just roll with it. But there's also like a basic thing running through my head, what I want to see, and it depends on where I'm at, what series I'm working on. Even just the idea of, being out in nature with my partner, and some of that stuff sneaks in, and and things that like that, the sort of the macro and the micro, the sort of combination of shapes that look almost mechanical or machine made, but they are from a seed pod, and when you roll that in the clay, how that can look like something that's been processed outside of my hands. But and I love the material. I love the it's just become so natural for me to just work, even drawing. It's just, and then there's the interplay between the 2D and the 3D, and taking from either one and using it. That's kind of a good starting point. So if I've already been doing drawings, I take that to the studio and see what it looks like in a 3D sort of state, a sculptural state, and then I get really excited, like, wow, this is even better, and then take that again and apply things that I've done there to the drawings or the paintings. So I'm getting excited thinking about it. It's yeah. Is that an explanation of process?
That's a great explanation of process. Thank you. Can you tell us about some of your? So let's chat more specifically about some of the series, and all of your series have really awesome names, which I absolutely love. There's Face Value, there's In Order of Appearance, there's like quite a few really, really great series, and I think those names, and for both of you have quite quirky names for some of your pieces, and some of those series, and I think that kind of grounds, at least for me, when I come to your work, that's a starting point in a way. And they can be quite whimsical, but they're also serious. They're also kind of very serious in other ways. And for me, that was the exciting thing of bringing your work together for this show, that it was both whimsical and fun and playful, but also it was very serious, that there are kind of very core serious things at philosophically kind of at the core of your work, which I was really interested in. And there's this placement of where we are as human beings, how we relate to each other, how we relate to nature, and how we come together, and how we kind of live with all of these complex ideas, not us putting politics aside, but also kind of bringing that in. But how do we live within ourselves was a really interesting thing for me when thinking about this show and thinking about your work individually and then together in a relationship. Can we talk a little bit about some of those themes then? Because there's a kind of idea of awe and being in nature and reconnecting back to nature. And very early on in our conversations, we were talking about what you just mentioned about going out and returning to nature with your partner, and that was also kind of around the time of COVID as well. And there's also then a transition to a kind of togetherness and your exploration of moths and butterflies and regeneration and kind of being in a cocoon, being protected, but then kind of regeneration that comes out of that. Can you talk us through a little bit about how those things connect and what that moment was like for you? What were you sort of thinking about with these kind of incredible large-scale works and then very small, very intricate kind of butterfly cocoons that you then went to explore?
Well, the nature side of things, like when Ellen and I first got together, she was already a bit of a hiker, and I was craving that. And this is, going back 12 years or something. But so we started going bushwalking, and and coming from, you know, the city and and then getting out and then just being amongst it, it really taught me just how important it is to be with nature and to remember that we're just a speck within all of this, and it doesn't really matter because we're just a blip. And I know that for some that might freak them out, but for me it gave me comfort to know that, you know, none of this is really, you know, yeah, I mean it's real, but it's just like it's gone, you know. So it's nice to be amongst everybody while we're here and to enjoy it. But it's also just good to remember that there is some trees, there's mountains and rivers, and to swim in them. And I guess that started sneaking majorly into a series of work where I was, again, stepping away from... This was before COVID. I felt like I was stepping away from people. The band weren't performing. We were on hiatus. I wasn't looking at people from the stage down and like this, you know, and I have like I remember faces and you know, and I'll like maybe like 6 months or 2 years, you know, 10 years later I'll see somebody, I'm like, they're at a gig, you know, and that would drive me a little bit crazy as well. And so stepping away from that, the work became more about land and awe and then when COVID hit, I suppose, you know, we couldn't get out to that, but you know, we'd go for walks down to we were lucky we're near a creek, and but I did start thinking more about, you know, the lack of community around us, and that idea of just being in our little cocoons, and again, you know, it's only afterwards, after making these works, that I've thought about this. Like at the time, it was like, this is just what I started making. But it kind of just grew out of not being able to even go down to Frankston. I actually ended up making a lot of the butterflies and moths in my painting studio. So it was like actually the first time where things were crossing over while I was making. So I'd be drawing one day or painting and then like switching back and forth. And I don't know if I'm answering this question, but it's okay, good. Yeah, exactly. Good point. But yeah, you know, I was craving, I go in and out of wanting to be around people and then wanting to be away and just with like my family. And, but at that point I really was missing, as we all probably were to some degree, my community. And that was like my way of building my own community. So I'd go into the studio and I'd see them all kind of growing amongst myself, and I felt comfort in that. Yeah, I definitely remember feeling that way. Like, here you are, you know, up on the wall there was like, you know, 30 paintings on paper, and I just felt safe.
That's really awesome, because I've every time I've encountered your work, Brendan, I've always felt like I was amongst friends. And from the very first show, and when we were unpacking this show, I would like pull out another work and be like, "Hello, friend," and then like we'd, you know, and I just really had this. It was, you know, it was such a beautiful feeling for me personally to kind of do that, but also with your work too, Lisa. You know, a lot of these works I'd only seen online, and so to unpack them, and especially, you know, there's a beautiful mask over there, and there's only so much that you can see in a photograph, but when you see some of these works, there are details that come out. The materiality of them is really quite beautiful, and I love the pieces that you use gold leaf with, because for me, and certainly kind of in thinking about this this idea of awe and thinking about us in this grander cosmic context, and thinking about how we have gold on Earth, you know, it was basically a meteorite shower, and then we've got, you know, this precious metal that now we use in this kind of, you know, ridiculous way. But is it ridiculous? Because it's then, you know, connected to wood and connected to all of these other materials that are kind of the primary and the core materials of our planet and our being, and the chemistry that we're basically just made up out of, you know. And so for me, that kind of conversation just really made sense across both of your work. Lisa, you've made some pretty cool pieces. There's a gorgeous Pussy Riot necklace at the entrance of the exhibition, and there've been a few works as well that you've kind of made references to, both musical references and artistic references. There's a reference to Martin Creed in the exhibition. There's another amazing South American female artist reference. Can you talk us through a little bit about what it is that you're interested in exploring, what you wanted to do with those kind of references, especially with the Pussy Riot necklace?
The Pussy Riot necklace, I made 3 of them. Actually, my mum sewed them. So, yeah, that's kind of special. She's died now. So we did, now and then did some things like that together. So that first started when me and Chicks on Speed had an exhibition in Wellington at the City Gallery about probably 10 years ago or so. And all the collaborative pieces I've done with them come out of conversations we have, or emailing, or how we're going to do the show, or this is what I'm working on now, this is what I'm interested in now, or maybe this could, it's completely, what do you call organic? That horrible word, organic. But it's sort of that process that just sort of grows by itself, it feels like. And some of the outcomes can be completely unexpected, and often they even happen in the space when we're setting up. And so Alex said, Pussy Riot, we should do something with them. Pussy Riot are a Russian group of women who did a lot of protest and activities against Putin and basically the Russian system. And they mostly got famous by doing this performance in a church. This kind of kicked off their international attention, I think, where they did a song against Putin and the Russian system, and they wore these coloured balaclavas to disguise themselves, and these dresses that kind of fitted. I mean, they're artists too, dresses that fitted the balaclava. And they got arrested and put into jail, and there's a whole story there about them. I was also intrigued at how they started to almost become mainstream. So, in fact, I think in Melbourne, a fashion designer took the balaclavas and did this whole runway inspired by them. I can't remember. Was it in Melbourne?
I went to the story just before.
That's funny. But that intrigued me. Almost that intrigued me more than their political activity, was the influence they're having on culture and fashion and art. And then Alex said that. So, I came up basically with my own version of their balaclava, which was called Pussy Riot necklace, which is the 3 of them. So the first 2 are just made out of fabric, and the third one has Chicks on Speed's hand-printed fabric, like a patchwork kind of put around the face. Yeah. Is that your...
I'm going to open up to questions. I've got more questions, but I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. Does anyone have any pressing questions? Put your hand up and we'll get you to maybe project, or maybe we've got another mic. No?
I wanted to ask about influence particularly, and how you talk about influence. Were you at one point afraid of influence, afraid of that coming through in your work, or were you always open to influence, I guess?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because it's such a biggie for us artists, I think. And there's this awesome thing of being conscious of influence or unconscious. So there's another world you can look at. And being afraid, yes, you can be a bit afraid of it. Yeah, we don't want someone to say, oh, they've copied that person, they look like that person, their work. We don't really want that. We want to be the original, all that kind of. But there's this other wonderful thing is that it's so totally normal. It's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful. Let's grab it. Let's use it. Let's pinch the fuck out of each other. I think that's actually the way to go with it, and not to be so nervous and held back and afraid of what people will say because perhaps we've been influenced by someone. And yeah, you could spend many lifetimes literally choosing that as your way to work. That there's lots of possibilities there. Yeah, lots of choices.
Say no more. I'm with Lisa.
This has been basically our entire conversation the last couple of months. We just all agree with each other. It's been great. Lisa, you come from New Zealand. Have there been any particular kind of New Zealand references, apart from the New Zealand jade that you work with? Have there been any kind of particular references that you're conscious of, or that you've subsequently come to realise have been more subconscious references?
Yes, every single thing I do is because I'm a New Zealander, I would say. Yeah, and my childhood was in New Zealand, and that's my culture. In fact, I always thought Australia was kind of similar, but it's really not. I've learned in the last week. Yes, and then I've played with that too. So when I first got to Munich, for example, I did a lot of work with sheep. Like I cast sheep and I drew sheep and I found plastic sheep. And yeah, and it's sort of like this. What? I cut sheep's head off. That's right. I did that. Yeah. And that was sort of my conscious way of trying to figure out that I was a New Zealander living in Germany. That was truly where I'm from. I always felt a bit almost lost in a way, We moved a lot as a kid. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot. But when I left the country, it's so obvious where you're from. It's, it hits you in the face like a steam train. There's no more lostness. It's very clear. Yeah, so I sort of played around with it. You could call it like an identity thing, I think, when I first arrived in Germany, the first 2 or 3 years. Yeah, so that's kind of a conscious, I fake grass I would find in hobby shops because that's a farm, or a sheep truck with sheep in it. I don't know, there was heaps of pieces I made sort of trying to do typical New Zealand work, maybe something like that. Yeah.
Brendan, Frankston boy, how's Frankston influenced you?
Yes. Well, I guess some of you. Well, yeah, Frankston is it's a mix of things. It's by the bay, so it's kind of pretty, but then the way they built the town is kind of ugly. They used it, but like architects would use it or town planners would use it as an example of how not to build a town, but within that, especially without having any kind of other example of how to be, growing where you grow up, it was it's just where I lived, and I guess it taught me how to be streetwise, how to kind of be amongst people, and just to also, there was a mix of people. There's like wealthy people, there's poor people, it's like middle class, and you go to school with all of these different kids, and I guess I learned to just speak to people on a general level, and not about where you're from and why and how can that help or whatever. It was just, so that's definitely, I think, a thing that came up from growing up in Frankston. And also, a lot of people stay in Frankston, and it's a thing where, for me, my brother was the first influence to leave and explore outside of that. He would catch a train and head out of town, and I kind of just followed in his footsteps and go exploring. And and then when you step out of that, it's just all these other influences are coming in, and it's sneaking into your work or life, just mentality.
Are there any more questions? Yeah.
That's about what you do in relation to the idea of art and the idea of craft, where you see yourselves positioned. This might be a really boring question, except that I know that in Munich, for example, the relationship between jewellery and art, fine art, if you want to call it that, which is really an awful word, much worse than organic. It's really vital. There's an enormous amount of connection. And I guess more recently in Australia, there's been less of a divide between the two spheres than there used to be. But if you've got any interesting stories to tell about the way other people have identified you, how you've had to kind of, how you've dealt with that, or how you think about your work, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, I've been doing this for 30-odd years, but that's always an issue. Well, not so much the last while, but you somehow have to find a way with that, a position with it in some way. So pretty much what I came up with was it doesn't matter. So whether I choose to call my work craft, which I do, applied art, which I do, art, which I do, jewellery, I call it everything. But me naming it or calling it or stating it belongs in a certain place actually doesn't influence the work at all. Not at all. Not for 1 second. So that for me is kind of the guts of it, I think, the place I've reached that makes the most sense. Yeah.
And then it just seems like you wouldn't have had such an open approach to making the work, and so exploratory. If you'd stayed working as you may not have, if you'd really only been thinking about the craft context, I don't know, or the applied art context.
Yes, and that's my training too, I suppose, because I did learn goldsmithing in the craft design course in an art school in the South Island. Kobe Bossard was around, the Swiss goldsmith who had a big influence on New Zealand jewellery. I mean, that's all my information. Yeah. So to say, would I have ended up in a goldsmith's shop making gold rings all day? Probably not, I'd imagine. I mean, whatever that mysterious thing that kicks you into art, really, that's playing a role as well, yeah. But I think that conversation with art versus craft versus applied, all of that, we can keep chatting about that. It can remain a conversation. But I think us artists don't kind of care. But I love that I can be in this gallery with some paintings and beautiful sculptures and paintings with Brendan. I can be in a design context. Craft, of course, that's without saying. So I actually love that my work does land in lots of different spots. That what suits me fine.
Yeah, I've over the years questioned all of this myself. Growing up with parents that were potters, I would see their work and the relationship it sort of had with the viewer, and I think for me, I wanted to step away from that. One, to do my own thing, but two, because the way craft can kind of put rules upon the artist, like I was saying before, with it's functional. If it's warped, it's not. And over the years, people still refer to some of my sculptures as pots, and I'd like to say that doesn't bother me, but and it's not because I actually love pottery, and I respect it as an art form, but I don't see them as pots. And I mean, even though I can throw on the wheel, and you know, it's all using those techniques. It's something else. But maybe as I'm getting kind of older, or sort of maybe more confident with where I'm amongst all of it, I'm less bothered by all of that. But back when I first started, I was quite defensive. They're not pots. You know, I would turn them upside down and, you know, cut holes in them and be like, you can't use this, you know. And I think it's more the way people try and pigeonhole everything, you know, that. And it's like Lisa was saying, in a way, that idea of being able to just land in all these different places, it's the first time I thought about it like that, where if you do, I mean, you're just like so outside of it all, but you know, I guess that's kind of why, like, you're not restricted to rules, even though you say you're a jeweler or you're within craft and da 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 da. It's I just love the idea of not having rules, and any way of escaping those, and then sometimes using them to build something else. Yeah.
For curators, that's also very refreshing, right? Because for me, this show's been a really a joy. Is one word that I've come to quite a bit while working on this show, and while I've known your work independently, bringing it together and across all of these questions around craft and art and freedom and exploration has been really great. And I think we could have done this any which way. We could have curated this show in, you know, various different configurations, and it would have worked, because the kind of conversation that you're both having across these works is sort of similar. And, you know, we could tease out all sorts of relationships and connections, and that's been really really quite fun. Do we have... I've got one more question before we finish up, but do we have any more questions? Yeah.
This is a question for Brendan. I'm just interested in the relationship between your music and the works that you make. I can see there's a sort of a rawness about, you know, you hear the rawness in your music and you see that, but I just wondered if you could talk a little bit to that, the influence or the relationship.
I guess it comes back to immediacy and just stripping away all the fluff, and with the lyrics, because lyrics are a big part of what I do. They never kind of come into the sculpture or the paintings, but with the music, I see them as I'm crafting them, I'm sculpting them, chipping away at these lyrics to the point where I'm like, okay, got it. But then there's those days where we're jamming and there's a stream of consciousness where I just start saying whatever's coming to mind, and it's often a surprise. It's like, oh, well, I'm thinking about that. And sometimes those songs are better than the ones I've been chipping away at. And so it's the same with making the work, the sculptures or paintings. Sometimes it's the ones where you're not thinking so much, and it's more of a sort of a deeper channeling where you're most surprised, and the rawness is the immediacy, I think. I hope I answered that. Yeah, I mean, even like with the bronzes, you know, they're so sort of here and they're so strong and tough, but I made them by just a lot, like drawing into the clay and then pouring wax into the clay and then peeling the clay away and then having that cast. And again, it's this kind of fast motion that then you're sort of left with something that's there forever. I love that idea of just capturing like a moment in your mind, and it's there, and it's done, and it's kind of what one of the things that gets me wanting to do anything is just the idea of it being there without them. Like, I can step away and it still exists. You know, it's on its own now. Yeah.
What piece won't you ever part with?
maybe like I've made like a little family of snails when I was about 4 years old. Yeah, it's like 4 snails in a line stuck, like and Dad put on a little block of wood and dated it, and Brendan, yeah, they're B. Huntley 1984 or something like that. So it might have been like maybe only like 2, but that's something I probably would never part with.
Same. Yeah. I'm just thinking, because my first thought when you asked that, but I agree with the childhood things, was I would part with anything if it's sold. And then, of course, because then that opens up that whole conversation with we make full-time living from this. And all the joyful, awesome, terrible, amazing, all the spectrum that is attached to what I just said. Yeah, because it's a big challenge. So that's why, if someone wants to buy a piece or an institution wants to buy a piece or whoever it is, then yes, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise you'd kind of want to keep it all. Like, I haven't seen some of these things for over 15 years, and I'm like, damn, I wish I could still have that. And then there's a couple of things that, I still own, and I hope that nobody says, I buy it, because I want to keep it. But, we got to do our thing, got to survive. So maybe, it will sell.
Which one's Brendan?
I mean, I want to keep this bronze that's, popping off the wall up there. It's above my fireplace at home, and I already miss it. So, yeah. But if someone said, I'd probably be like, okay. And you have it.
Well, there were definitely 2 works that were missing from the final list because Brendan wouldn't bring them in, because you wouldn't part with them. That was one of them, and the other ones we literally glued that to the table just before everyone walked into the space because Brendan wouldn't part with it. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. We are going to hang about for a little while longer. So if you do want to come up and ask Brendan or Lisa any question or just chat to us, please do. Please take your time to see the show if you haven't already. Hang about. No pressure to leave. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for.
I just want to publicly say thank you so much, Dunja, for everything. So for kickstarting this whole exhibition, bringing us together, bringing the work together, your whole vision of the show. You're quite amazing and special, and there's big, and the team, everyone here as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Brendan. For me, it's been a pleasure working with these two. I'm really going to miss both of your company in the space. I will probably also keep pestering you and sending you random videos on Instagram. I hope that's okay. We've already exchanged a few, so that's really fabulous. Thank you for the conversations, and thank you for trusting us with this journey. It's been quite a thing.
And thank you to all the people that have loaned. I don't know if you already said that.
Thank you to all the collectors. And also I have to say thank you to Talano Galleries who've been working with us, who represent Brendan, and Gallery Funaki. Katie Scott is here. And I think without the support of them, this also would have been a lot harder. So thank you very much. Please do enjoy your afternoon, and thank you for spending a couple of hours with us today. Thank you so much.